Hi, everybody. Really great to see you all here. So welcome to a discussion between myself and Naily, which is always all going to be about a hybrid workplace today. And so I'm sure lots of you know Naily already. And so her focus is always about working with clients to create a happy and productive workplace playground, which I'll be asking her more about in a minute. And we've got some common ground, Naily and I. So we've both got big birthdays. So it's her second business birthday and it's ours today. So we're celebrating. So I've come well prepared for this one. And so I run a company called Sukio, which does digital marketing in Cambridge. And this whole topic of hybrid working is really of interest to me because, like so many other small businesses and large corporates, we're all dealing with that whole transition. You know, it's one thing up in sticks last year and leaving and just having to work out in a very small space of time how to work in this way. But now we're in this kind of funny transition period. So yeah, I'm really honoured to be Naily's guest interviewer today to find out more about this. So thank you, Naily.
Thanks for coming, Sue.
And so I'm going to sort of take more of a backseat and just ask you the questions so that you can come up with all sorts of tips and, you know, share people a bit more of your experiences and tell them more about what it is that you do and the kind of solutions you come up with. So let's kick off by asking you a bit more about the phrase workplace playground that I mentioned near at the beginning. So what do you actually mean by this? Tell us more.
Yeah, it's quite a funny story because I love to work and I love play, and for me the two have to go hand in hand, right? And as I was going through my business, I've used so many different iteration of that phrase, and what it really means. Well, if you look at the playground, like a real playground, what do you see? You'll see kids are running around and they are playing with each other, but this goes way beyond that. Actually, a fun fact is that the playground was actually designed by, I think it was a German inventor back in the 1700s or something, and his name was Friedrich Frobel. He actually designed a concept because he felt like school wasn't enough for kids to develop other skills, especially soft skills, and to be able to interact with other people as well. So when you look at the playground, it's way more than just kids playing. First, we have boundaries set by the parents. So if you look at an organization, there will be boundaries set by the business leaders. Then you have the fact that there are different games for different age range, which helps for growth. And that's what makes things more exciting for kids because they are trying different things. They are pushing themselves out of their boundaries. They know what to do. Of course, they do argue. They do argue and everything. But then if you see what happens, they go back to becoming best friends again and, you know, life go back to normal. And so all of that happens at work. Well, a lot of people, when they look at play and have fun at work, they might think about the Google offices. Oh, it would be nice to have a slide to go from one floor to the kitchen or something. Free foods, football table, video games. But all of those things are add-on. They're great if you have a great culture and you give people what they need. You build your playground so that people know what to expect. A beautiful workplace playground is somewhere where people go to work. You can hear people laughing. Of course, there's always going to be stress. There's always going to be lack of resources, money, different priorities. But people know they can be trusted. Their voice can be heard. Management might not always agree with the decision being put forward, but they might make the right decision. And people believe that it's been done in the right way for the organization and for everybody as a whole as well. There's clarity and there's vision, there's structure. People know what to expect. They know that my work matters because of the goals of where we are going as well. And so, and more importantly, people feel empowered, right? So leaders know how to know what the boundaries are, right? So this is the thing that you should or shouldn't do, what the processes and policies, but you have the leeway to go around and start running and develop yourself within the organizations as well. So that's why I really talk about the workplace playground, so that we don't forget about the fun of being at work, whilst at the same time, we don't forget that work is not just about having fun. It's about delivering, making progress, and also for leaders, it's about setting the right boundaries and setting up your organization in a way that helps people to actually enjoy the workplace playground.
And do you think this is a mistake that some leaders make then? So they think, okay, well, let's put in some bean bags and let's have this play area and make it more of this kind of environment where people feel like they never want to leave because it's, too much fun and that kind of thing. But they feel like they've done that. So that's all they need to do. And sometimes they forget to put in those other structures around it that makes people productive as well as happy.
Yes, and that happens a lot. Obviously, I do track a lot of tech companies because I work in tech and it's my main sector. But that happens quite a lot, where a lot of new startups and tech companies will usually go for, especially free food is the best one, right? They always have free food and believe that is enough for the culture, or that might affect people. Of course, I love going to a place where I get juice in the morning for free and bagels and everything. But if you notice that if you have all of those things and you don't have the basics right in terms of identity and people knowing what they need to do, you're still going to have a higher attrition rate as well. People will be leaving the company, or people won't be happy at work or won't be productive. The great example is, if you want to just see that in action, go on Glassdoor, because I was actually researching a few companies the other day. And it was really interesting to see the comments, the pros and cons. So for that particular company, people rated the company 1. They gave them 1 out of 5 stars, right? And the comments were on the pros: great foods. It's great, we've got flexibility to come at work whenever we want to, and the food is amazing. The cons: we need more direction.
Right.
We don't know what we're doing. How is my work impacting the future of the organization? There's a lot of changes, but there's no communication. So that's why the food is great, but people will appreciate it and say, thanks for that, but I'm still not happy.
It is something that I see, because I work so much with businesses of all sorts of different shapes and sizes in Cambridge, and like you do so much work in the tech kind of community as well, and you do have these huge companies that offer free lunch and free breakfast and that kind of thing, and then you hear about the smaller ones feeling like, well, how can we compete with that? But then the two seem different to me, in that in the smaller ones people feel more listened to perhaps, and they can make more of an impact with the work that they're doing, where sometimes the larger ones, then they're more of a tinier cog in a very massive machine. Is that something that you find as well, that there's room for the two to compete against each other?
Yeah, definitely as well, because some small companies might have the advantage, because especially even when we look at this hybrid working, everybody are working from home. But if you have a small team, it's a lot easier for people to connect at a deeper level, because they had that before. And it's also a lot easier not to forget that there is someone on another side. Obviously, there's still challenges on how to bring them part of the decision making and making sure they're not forgotten. But it's definitely a lot easier. So because people know that they have access to the business leaders, they've been heard and listened to, and if you have a good culture, then you can go a long way without having free foods. And smaller companies as well, what I love about them is easy to have a cake day. Who doesn't like it? Likes cake day or a pound quiz or something like that. Larger companies, on the other hand, might struggle a little bit, because the larger you are, the communication becomes, is a lot difficult. Information gets trickled down, but you never know who really absorbed it and who doesn't. So when you move into this hybrid world, is how do you make sure that different departments can still talk to each other? It's a little bit harder, but how do they still have information about people who are maybe not visible anymore? You don't see them, you don't cross path in different areas in the office. So those are a challenge. And actually, with larger companies, although yes, it's easy for them to give free food and all of those perks, being online means that they have to rethink as well what those perks are going to be, because they can't do the same thing as well. So how do you make sure that people have a space to talk about what they're doing, the new innovation in the company, even if a department is not one of the most visible, it's also nice for them to feel like, yes, we are core of the company. So how do you do that in a world where we are going to be even more disconnected, whilst at the same time it's important to stay as connected as possible?
I'd love to explore that with you a little bit more, about the challenges that you've seen people facing over the last year, and less so the okay, how do we transition in a hurry to this
Yeah.
situation? Because it's now, where are we? We're now in June, you know, and all this kicked off last March. So, you know, I think we've all got that level of understanding of the sudden challenge to do this. But now we're in this kind of, I hate the phrase, the new normal, but it has kind of, you know, we're all a bit used to it now. What are these challenges that you're seeing people facing that are ongoing, you know?
Yeah. So the question is, what do we do next, right? Because there's a lot of, actually, what do we do next and how do we do that? So back in, I can't believe it's been over a year, but back in March and April last year, we went home, we kind of survived and got by. But now, because it's been such a long year, first of all, there's a lot of emotional fatigue, not necessarily linked to work, but emotional fatigue that people are having based on their well-being already, which means that when that fatigue level is quite high and the stress level is high, small issues tends to go overboard because you already feel like, it's one more thing that I need to talk about. Actually, I was speaking to one woman and she was telling me about a team member when they have these really tiny disagreements and they were threatening to quit. But she's like, but it's such a small thing, because it feels like it's one small thing on top of everything else that she's probably not even talking about based on her personal life and everything else. So managing well-being and emotional well-being is one of the things. The second one is, how do we move forward? So for example, if you had people working from home, they were happy to do that because there was no other choices. Now, there are a lot of companies that are saying, oh, well, we're just going to go fully remote straight away. There's no communication plan. There's no change management. They're not thinking about what new processes do we need. And actually relooking at their old processes, are they still viable, right? So that's a bit of a struggle because it's such a lot of work to change all of that. And then the hardest part as well is visibility. So for a year, we kind of got by, but people are now used to working from home. They are now asking for, right, we're changing our minds too often. What is it that we're doing? What is, there's not like a huge plan, or people don't really know what the roadmap is going to be. So that's frustrating people because they feel like life is changing a lot and they don't know what they are doing. So I think the hardest part for business leaders as well is embracing hybrid or not. I know a lot of people don't really want to say that, but for some people, working from home is just not their thing. So they're worried that if they decide to go and say, let's go back in the office, some people will be like, actually, no, I want my flexibility. So how do you deal with that? If they decide to say, okay, now we're just going to go and stay completely remote, what if you are someone from university and you're in a share house that's going to impact your life? What do we do? So there's a lot, I think, you know, as much as I love remote working, I think it's amazing. For business leaders who are new to it, there's just a lot of headaches and questions. And just to quickly finish on that as well, the other thing that people don't talk a lot about as well is things surrounding security. So if I'm going to work from home as well, the life and work gets mixed up. So how do you make sure that people are using the right devices to access customer data, obviously depending on the sensitivity of your work as well? So it's pretty much rethinking a lot of the things that you've already done when you are building your business and just going through it as well. But then how do you do that? How do you assess your business? Which is, again, another nightmare for business leaders as well.
I think you're right. We're in this kind of, well, now what phase? You know, it's one thing kind of firefighting and thinking, okay, right, we've got to cope with this. We've got to adapt somehow. But now we are so much further through it, and businesses have changed in this time. I mean, thinking about my own, I've hired people, I've had people who are on maternity leave, so their cover left, and then that person came back, and you know, I've got someone who's moving to Hull. Long story. You know, and my business is it's like everyone else. You know, everyone's got these very individual challenges, and what I see business leaders having to tackle at the moment is how you do come up with this plan that suits everybody, because it's not as easy as saying, right, okay, everyone back in the office on Monday, full-time hours, and I can only speak for myself, but you have to make this kind of very individual plan that works for everybody, but also works for everybody and their very own specific circumstances, whether that's around children or people they're caring for in the home, or the size of the room they're working in, you know, their home environment. So what advice would you give to business leaders to help them create this plan that is suits everybody in a blanket approach, but then also suits everybody in a very individual way as well?
Yeah, I would say that the first thing is, first of all, you kind of need to, I think, subconsciously accept that things are not going to go back to normal, and try to avoid adapting this remote or hybrid work back into the every day, what we used to do before, we have to do it as well. So for example, if you are going to offer some level of flexibility, then it's definitely start talking to your teams and understand what you can do, and also what fits your business. So that's actually, you need to also, I would even say start with that. How much flexibility can you offer that won't affect you? For example, if you have a business where people are all over the world, does it make sense to have core hours or not? Does it make sense to have core hours on certain days? Because at the end of the day, the reason why we have core hours is because people believe that we have to be online at the same time, which is not true. So then it's an education piece of how can we start talking or asking questions by having more open discussions rather than closed discussions. So if we have a team discussions on Slack or something like that, you have a trail and people won't feel the need to have a lot of calls. So that's where the education comes up as well. Having said that, if you are in a customer-facing business and you expect certain things to happen for your customers, it might actually make sense to have core hours so that you know that most of your team members are on around that time. And then after that, it's up to them as well. Because I've seen a lot of things where people are imagining this hybrid working by going, well, 3 days in the office. And when you're working from home, you're 9 to 5. Like, okay, great. But if I have kids, maybe that actually might not work for me. I might prefer to start a bit earlier. And if I have core hours, or if I know that, well, we usually have team meetings where we have to physically be in at certain time, I make it work. And again, it's about this idea of the workplace playground. You have the boundaries set by the organization and people can then adapt around it as well. So it's really important to understand where you want to go and what suits your business. Yes, for me, I would say fully remote is great. But like I've said before, it might not be the right thing for your own business. Having said that, thinking that you can just continue with a face-to-face office is going to affect you. A lot of people will be wanting that flexibility. It might be easier to start hiring in different towns, even if it's in the same countries. If you want to go broader, why not? But even in the same country, like you're saying, Sue, you have someone moving to Hull, and flexing some of the way you will do your business means that you can retain someone that you've known for a while and you know that they're doing great work. Yes, how can you keep that? So it's really about first, like I say, just understand from a business leader, what is it that I can do? Is it because I'm not comfortable about it? So then you educate yourself, or is it because the business really needs it? And then you make a decision from that. And then you open it up to absolutely everybody and start asking questions, what works, what doesn't work. You might find out that some people will be, yes, it's fine. We have remote working all across, but can I have a co-working space? So then you can think about, can I offer a co-working space so that for people who just cannot stand staying at home, because actually there are people who just can't stay being at home. They have that possibility as well. So there's a lot of things that can be done, but I always believe that sometimes we spend so much time hearing about what other people have done. And it's great that Google is doing this, Facebook is doing this. But then what about you? What works for you and for your organization? And what is it that my people want? And how can we find the sweet spots where we won't please everybody? But if you really listen to people, explain the reasoning, and have a right change management process to handle that, you actually go a step further, really.
I think that's really important about how much you involve people in the decision making as well. And the thing that really comes across to me from what you were just saying is about boundaries, because on the surface, what you think initially people will want is, okay, let's have this really flexible approach to working. You can hot desk, you can come in whatever you want. And then when you drill down, you realize actually a lot of people like the regularity of knowing they're working Monday to Friday, even if it's not 9 to 5, even if it's different hours, actually a lot of the time people like that. And you see, in some companies where people say, just take as much holiday as you want. And the idea is that you can have what you want, and people probably won't take 50 days a year. But then actually sometimes things like that can put the pressure on the employee, and they think, oh well, I sometimes I like just having some kind of proper outline of what I need to be doing. So I think that's really interesting, and also for boundaries as business leaders themselves to think, well, where's my cutoff point here? At which point do I decide, okay, well, this is what we're going to do, and at which point do I carry on asking opinions and so what are your thoughts on that, about for business leaders themselves, and how you can kind of ease them through the decision-making process at a time when things are still changing? The reopening just got put back by a month. So how can business leaders themselves, how can you ease that whole decision-making process about what to do next?
Yeah, I think that the first thing to do is to stop and breathe. I know it sounds a bit weird, but we're so used to action, right? So it's like, okay, there's a problem, I'm going to solve it. But with this one, one thing I think is you kind of need, as a business leader, okay, which is kind of hard to do because I know by experience, there's always a million things that you have to do, but you kind of need to stop and breathe and think about, what have we done so far? What worked, what didn't work, and how do I assess my organization for the future? So you kind of look at the resiliency of your organization. And I'll talk a lot about organizational debt as well. So if you think about, if for example, if people are working from home, they didn't have the right tools, how do I make sure that people have the right tools to do their work? If they didn't have a lot of guidelines and policies, what are the new guidelines and policies that we need to put in place? And the biggest one is about being agile, in terms of understanding that we need to start playing with short-term goals and long-term goals as well. So don't strive for perfection straight away. But before you start moving, have an idea of, let's say, at the end of this year or a year from now, we want our remote or hybrid business to look like X, Y, Z. And those are the steps that we need to do to get there. And then you can start formulating different plans and see how that fits with the overall vision of what you have, and slowly doing that. So this is why I talk a lot about, first start by assessing your business, because as I've said before, things are changing rapidly. Every month there's something new. But if you spend the time to assess your business and know where you want to go, when a new change happens, you only have to assess on top of the last assessments, rather than thinking like chaos. It could be absolutely anything else. So yeah, for me, the first thing would be to really, really understand, how strong are we from a market point of view, right? So is this new change affecting the market, affecting our relationship with our customers? But then, because I do a lot of work operationally, internally, then assess, how do you agree, like decision-making? How do you normally run your decision-making process? When do you need to go back and review decision in the past? What is your governance in your organization? The way you run projects, the way you even structured projects. And like my favorite questions to business leaders, if I wake you up at midnight, I don't know why I would do that, but if it happens, and I ask you what kind of projects are running in your organization, how long will it take you to be able to answer me? Obviously, there might be some words that we need to edit out of the business show, but most people might say, I don't know. And that's pretty much where you need to start, that high-level view and the plan, and then merging the short-term plan and the long-term plan together. Although you focused on the short-term plan, because at the end of the day, we need to pay the bills, we need to pay, our people and get things going along. But then how do you attract and draw the long-term plans into your into your day-to-day or your quarter, so that you're making sure that you're making the right changes within your organization to end up with the right hybrid working place that you wanted as well.
And do you find that business leaders are putting some of this off? Because there's this feeling, I mean, we ran this fun sort of social media thing back in last April, May, which we called a Sukio 6-pack about packaging and branding. And we called it that because it was vaguely amusing, but also because we thought, well, this thing's going to be over in 6 weeks. So how long how wrong we were. And are you finding still now that business leaders are thinking, okay, well, I will tackle that organizational debt and all these things, I will get planning again, but I'll just wait for this thing to be over, or I'll just wait for this next milestone to pass. So how would you advise business leaders to kind of get out of that mindset of, oh, I'll just wait for the next thing to happen, and to take action now? Because I think that is a bit of a struggle with the whole pandemic situation.
Yeah, definitely. But before I answer that, I just wanted to acknowledge and say thank you for the lot of great comments on the chat. I was just quickly glancing at that, and there's a couple of questions and messages on rules that we are going to go on as
let's go through
well.
those.
Yeah. So it's actually. So what's your question? So in terms of bring it back the.
Yeah, I suppose how you can get out of the mindset of, okay, well, I will tackle all of these business challenges, but I'll just wait for things to settle down. And then now that we're 15 months into this, whatever, and things still aren't settling down, how you can make yourself as a business owner have that discipline so that you don't delay any further.
Yeah. So there's two things that I do and I say to my clients. One, think about having a dinner with the Queen. And then the second one is think about holidays. So starting with the holidays one. When you're a business leader, or even if you're not a business leader, but you're someone who works in a fast-paced environment where things always happen. How do we tackle our holidays? We always delay our holidays because we think that tomorrow, maybe next week will be better. But then it gets to a point where I have to take time off or I will lose it. And for some reason, you do it. So most people might either wait until the moment they're about to lose the holidays before taking it, which could be a good thing or a bad thing because of the amount of stress you've carried for so long. And the same happens with businesses. There's never a perfect time to go on holiday, and there's never going to be a time where things flow perfectly. Because the moment your business starts flowing perfectly, you are already thinking about the next level. How can I make it better? How can I diversify my products? How can I make my customers happy?
I always say it's like, like people with plastic surgery, how they fixate on fixing one thing and they think, oh, that'll solve all my problems. And then as soon as they've got that boob job or whatever, then right, my nose, there's something wrong with my nose. It's just continually this work in progress. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, no, but this is a really good example. That's why you might as well assess your body before the plastic surgery to know everything that you need changing. But it's exactly the same. So if you understand that, then you need to understand that this period is not going to go away, and you need to find a way to tackle it. Have the headspace to think about what next, so that you can start changing the direction of your company as you need to as well. So we're gonna come back to the rules and guidelines in a bit because that's also quite important to this idea of change. The second one, the feedback I get whenever I say that to people, that there is no time like the present. If you don't start now, you might end up losing talented people. You might end up creating more frustration. And when you lose trust, it's actually a lot harder to get it back. So the question is, well, I'm busy. I've got a lot of things to do. What do I do? There's tons of things going on, which is 100% true. But then you need to create a discipline by creating 2 or 3 hours of your times that nobody can touch, at least for the period that you need to sort out what you need to sort out and create the headspace for yourself. And again, the question is, but a customer might call me and I need to be there for my team leads or for my people and everything. Well, if the Queen, whether you like the Queen, the monarchy or not, but we all know that if we invited to a dinner, right, with the best chefs at Buckingham Palace, most people will find the time to go.
Yeah, you don't say no to that, do you?
You won't say no to a dinner. I mean, for me, I'm already thinking about the dessert, right? The desserts, I'm already, I know that there's going to be great dessert. It doesn't matter what's happening during the week, right? You will block the time to go, and you will really invest in that moment and really go into the experience. And that's the same thinking, because I was actually mentoring a business in Cambridge, because he has a lot of ideas. They're great ideas, but nothing is written down. And if nothing is written down and you don't have a plan, then think about how it plays with everybody in your team. The more you're not sure about what you do, the more the anxiety will show in the change of direction, or people will get frustrated. They don't know, why are we doing this? And what is the vision? So it's really important that you don't just delay and create the time. If it's going to take you 2 weeks, 3 weeks, while you need even 2 mornings a week, tell your team, be upfront with them and says, only come to me if it's a life and death situation, right? If we're not going to go under, can it wait until the next day and do it the next day? But create the time to first assess the organization, as I've said before, don't be tempted to jump in and start fixing things, because you, like you're saying, the surgery, you might end up fixing one thing, but that wasn't actually the root cause of the problem. It was just the surface area. So spend the time to really assess your organization, have discussion if you need to. I've got a lot of questions that I help people with when I do that with them as well. Then once you know the real state and go, what is the priority and how do we create a priority list of what needs changing in our organization as well?
There's one thing I'm going to do immediately after this discussion. So on a Friday, I block it out for business development. And then that's what I try and do. But then inevitably something creeps in and I think, oh, well, I need to have that sort of coffee type conversation. Oh, I'll do that on Friday because I've got more time then. Or, oh, that's when I'll have another meeting. And then bit by bit, it kind of gets, eroded. So I think I'm going to change that entry in the name of it in my diary to dinner with the Queen. And then it will elevate it to that important, I can't eat into that. So I'm going to do that as soon as we've had this discussion. So what were the questions in chat that you spotted that we could tackle about rules and things?
Yes.
Let's chat about that. Yeah.
Yes, definitely, because there's been a lot of the comments about rules not being consistent in different organizations. And as I said, you need to look at adjusting it. And Anne Bailey put a really nice comments there on I think guideline needs to be consistent across a company, and if it's okay to adapt them team by team, which is another challenge as well. Yeah.
It's really hard, isn't it? Because it can be one of these things where you never ever reach the point where you've got the perfect solution. And then particularly, with a team my size, we've got sort of 9, soon to be 10 actually, of us. And so it will become very individual, but then at what point do you stop? What point do you stop adapting and changing? And then if someone leaves, there's something new. So what are you finding about that, about actually implementing guidelines that everybody can follow? What are you seeing that's particularly effective for people?
Yeah, I think we're going back to the flexibility. You need to have some level of flexibility because teams might do things differently, as long as the overall goal and the guidelines at the top levels are very clear, and that's what you need to adapt. Obviously, if we're talking about a large organization, especially for example, I used to work in Siemens Industry Software. Now, Siemens is a humongous company, right? There's no way they can have guidelines at that level that applies to every single different branch and department. And even a fun story, the branch I was working for Siemens actually came from a spin-off of Cambridge University company that eventually got bought by Siemens. And when there were both, bearing in mind that we're talking about startup mentality, teams in Cambridge, like my mom still was like, what, you go to work with jeans? I'm like, yes, we go to work with jeans and flip-flops if you want to. Then you get taken over by a huge corporation like Siemens, and they're like, you need to start changing what you wear, right? So you need to look more professional. Well, great. This is the guidelines of the company, but if they force it down on us, I know so many of my colleagues would have just walked away. And it's Cambridge, right? If you work in tech, you're a software engineer, you'll get another job, So they were like, let's just back off. So those kind of things, yes, probably applying it team by team is probably better. But when it comes to hybrid working, when it comes to the basics, when you're talking about the guidelines, especially at the beginning, make it easier for people. Because if I have to ask myself, do I do this today or do I do this tomorrow? It's so confusing. And we've all experiences, with the pandemic, when they will say, well, Leicester is closed, Birmingham is open. But when you're on the train, if I'm traveling, there's nothing that tells you this town is closed, this town is open. And people just might move, and it becomes more stressful on the people to have to remember mentally which town is closed, which one isn't. The fun one is in Madrid, because they didn't want to lock down after the first really hard lockdown that we had. They decided to lock down by GP area.
Okay, so, and that's where you are at the moment, isn't it, Naily, as well?
Yeah, so that's right. Yeah.
By GP area.
By GP area. So they look at the catchment of your GP and they say that area is locked down. Nobody knows. I don't even, I've had my UK GP, so many of them, but unless I go put my postcode, I never know where that stops. So they locked down the town, but people didn't really care. It's not that we didn't want to follow the rules, but you just don't know that you're entering a zone that's been locked down. And that's the same that happens when you're trying to offer, especially when you're bringing something new. And if you do vary the rules a lot per department or per teams, then how do I know which one we follow? And how do I know that we've already changed it? And think about yourself as well as a business leader, right? You have a all hands meeting, or you even don't even want to have that, and you're updating them on Slack. Which guidelines are you going to give them? So you kind of need to be mindful of what are the core things and what are not. It's a great example of having core things, but with flexibility. It's again, when I was working for Siemens, what I loved about our department, because we were really unique in a way, they will tell us we have flexi time. You come to work whenever, as long as you're in the office between 10 and 2 or 3. So those were the core hours. So I absolutely love it. I'm an early riser, so I'll get to work at 7 and finish by 2 or 3. I'm done, right? Perfect for me. But then on Friday, there's a bit of leeway, because most people, we used to work long hours anyway, so that by Friday, you've done your hours. So people were like, oh, should I really come to work on Friday? We've got flexi time. Well, the guidelines of the company and the site in Cambridge was that you have to come to work every single day. That's the workplace playground boundaries. So we had to come to work. But at 12 or 12:30, you go for lunch, and if you decide not to come back, it's fine. So it's kind of like it's a team thing where we just let it slide. But again, we used to work on output, so people knew you've done your work. We trust you that you've done your work. But unfortunately, because of the guidelines and the boundaries of the organization, you have to physically be in the office. And that's what we went with, right? So that's how you can flex some of the rules if you need to, because you know your teams better. So if you're wondering, should I give them flexibility, then discuss with them and see what do they need. And again, go back to how it affects the operation of the business and how it will affect other teams as well. If it's something that you can run with, yes, you can do that. But as long as your key message to the general organization is very clear. Otherwise, people get frustrated. They don't know which one do we follow. Is it team A or team B, or is it what our business leader are telling us? So I guess that I hope he answered your question. And if you have anything else, please do put in the chat. I'll be happy to discuss this further as well.
I think something to add to that as well is that so many businesses have carried on functioning really well by momentum, because they're well structured before and the team was happy and they just carried on moving forward. But one thing that really interests me is about new people joining, and particularly younger ones. We've got someone on our team who's fantastic. She's never worked in an office before. And because of the last year, she's really not worked in an office. She's been doing most of it remotely. So how do you... those things that people find instinctive about working their natural hours and working in a certain way, how do you pass that on to new joiners and also people that are quite new in the industry as well and haven't sort of picked up those cues about how to act in a workplace?
Yeah, that's really a test for managing on adrenaline, really, because it's like you said, how do you give them knowledge that you don't know whether they have it or not, because they are absorbing from each other? And that's going to be really one of the big challenges of organizations going forward as well. And that's where this idea of opening the discussions a lot more, especially if you are a small team and people get on really well, is it a way of moving from always hiding what we talk about to being a bit open, because you don't know who's listening. You don't know who's listening, and you don't know what they're learning by the discussions and what they're listening. So especially for those who follow the purist remote work, it's called asynchronous communication. So use a lot of things like Slack, move away from emails when you can, because at the end of the day, emails are, so move them into more question-based, argument-based on Slack, where people can write discussions. And again, if you're going to have a meeting at the end, is to review the agreement rather than just going point by point. So that's a way of sharing knowledge. The second one as well, you need to be a lot more mindful of how do I pair people up so that they can, because let's say if you're a new starter, especially if you're young, you might not have the confidence to go to another person in the company and ask a question, right? Or want to get to know them. So one of the things, and because I was judging awards a few weeks ago, and one of the great initiatives I've seen were things like where the HR set up a process where the new starters get to have conversations with people in other departments. If it's a 20 or 30 minutes conversation, whoever's new in the company, especially when they're young, they see a different perspective, things that they would have picked up in the kitchen, but now the company is making more intentional of that happening as well. And of course, the feedback, and whenever people talk about that, it's always about, but it's a waste of time, I'm busy, I have to make time for new starters. But let's sometimes let's not just focus on the now, but look at what you are creating in the future. The more you make the time for the new starters to get to know different team members, whether you do that with there's this thing called Donut. I might talk about that as well next week. It's an application on Slack that pair people up individually and encourage them to have a chat. So things like that needs to happen a lot more. And I'm a sucker for simplicity, right? I just love easy, simple stuff. Things that I have done even before the age of real remote working. When I was working in Siemens, I was managing large programs and projects in like the US, India, in Cambridge. So my team were all over the place. And eventually I started managing the program of people in China, in France. So it's just a lot of people to keep your eyes on. But managing a program is not about just the task. It's actually about the people. So then how do you change if you say to someone, well, me and you, we have a one-to-one. So what I do is every month, I change one nature of my one-to-one where it's pretty much about getting to know the other person. If I have to create another meeting and says, Sue, on top of all our one-to-ones, I want to have a chat with you. You might think, I've got a lot of things to do. But if I say to you, right, our one-to-one, maybe 10, 15 minutes updates, please update me on Slack, right? If there's any question, we tackle it. And then we just have a laid back discussion. That changes the nature of how you are building relationships. So you could have something like that where, especially now, breakout rooms works really, really well. Get your teams or different departments, because let's say I work with product and product marketing, our teams that needs to be really close together, pair them up. Say, okay, we've done our planning session. We've got 30 minutes left. I'm just going to put you in rooms of 2 or 3, and you can start having a conversation. Find a way to make it interesting, because sometimes dropping people in the room and hoping that their talk is the worst version of speed dating. But, just doing something like that and giving them maybe topics to talk about, projects, prompts, will help creating, again, those conversations that will happen in the hall, but you actually creating them in your company without the need of a big team building, without the need of creating even more meeting. So I call that this deconstructed team building, like with food, when you have a cheesecake, but there's no actual cheesecake. Everything is, you have all the components, but it's the same. So we don't have time for big team building. We don't have time for, or the budget to do it often, but we just change the nature of a meeting that's going to happen anyway. But we really become more focused on not just thinking that meetings are about tick boxes, about discussion that never ends, but it's also about building a relationship as well.
Because otherwise the communication is very functional, isn't it? Very transactional. I mean, one thing that that one of my team members mentioned this week, actually, we're going to start doing is just once a week, we'll have a kind of like a show and tell type thing, because she mentioned that sometimes other people do work in the company and other people don't see it. So you might make some video content and someone says, oh, that's really great, but then other people haven't seen it. And so we thought, let's do that once a week where we can show something off that we've done. And then, but my kind of ulterior motive about this is also to give it a focus, to create an opportunity at least once a week where we're talking about other stuff. We're interacting and we're bonding and all of that, because otherwise, like you're saying, all the communication is purely, okay, do this project, turn up at this time, do that, don't do that. And whereas those opportunities for softer communication and a few laughs along the way, I mean, we all need to let off a bit of steam. Shall we have some more questions? What have we got in the over here? I'm looking towards the right where my question is. What's this from... Oh yeah, what about the one from Mitesh is that the one you highlighted? Yeah, let's look at that one.
So when pandemic struck, there was a major stress spike from move from office to home, plus home responsibilities. Now rules are relaxing more. Do you anticipate another stress spike?
Yeah, I think so.
Back to...
I don't know what to do.
No, but it's a really good question, because this is kind of what might end up happening, because people might think that, yes, let's run back to the office, but they forget that because you've adapted your schedule. And quite frankly, what if you used to, let's say, squeezing in a workout in the morning, or you feel like, oh yes, I've got more time to have breakfast with my child. Now I have to go back to the office. You are also letting go of something. So the first time we let go of a lot of things to adapt to being at home, and now we have to let go of other things to go back. And if it's not handled properly, this same rush back in the office is going to happen without a plan. And that is going to create, again, more organizational debt, more people being frustrated. First of all, the going back to the office is even more complicated, I would say, than going back home. Because going back home, we had to do it. It was a government thing, right?
Now,
we have to do it.
So,
yeah. Exactly. So going back to the office is a company thing. So people will be like, oh, but they want us to go back in the office. So if you don't tackle it well, that becomes an issue. And there's simple things like health and safety. How can you make sure that people, are we going to still be distancing or not? And how can you convince people, maybe if someone was shielding before, how do you bring them back? But they might not want to come back for a while, at which point you default in the hybrid working without wanting it. So that's why it's important to go back to what I was talking about, assessing your organization. Because if not, you might end up being in this hybrid mode for a long time. And in your mind, you're thinking everybody's in the office apart from that person who's shielding. Well, that person, even if it's one person, will affect the company and the productivity anyway. So it's better to just include them from the beginning and thinking about how are we going to deal with that as well. And the other thing...
Oh, sorry, no, carry on.
The other point I wanted to make as well is a lot of people have made people furloughed. So imagine if you've been furloughed for 1 year, the rush back in the office, if it's not handled as a proper change, it means that you're not really thinking about how we're going to handle them. So they're coming back after being off for a while. Maybe someone was doing their job, maybe nothing was happening. How do you ease them back in and make them feel part of the team, get them up to speed, the processes and everything that might have changed before as well? So it's actually a really good question, because although we're talking back to going back in the office, and even if you want that, it's still not as simple to just say, let's go back and not think about assessing your organization and knowing exactly what you need to change and what you need to move forward with.
Do you feel as well that some of the stress comes from there not being an endpoint? So it's very difficult at the moment to say to everyone, right, this is the decision about how we're going to approach it, and we need to implement it by 1st of September. Yeah. It feels like we can never quite make that concrete plan because the plans keep on shifting. Do you think that causes a bit of stress and anxiety in itself?
Yeah, no, you really nailed it too. That's another level of confusion, really. I guess a lot of business people I know were quite frustrated about the delay in 1 month.
Yeah,
because it felt,
yeah,
exactly, because it felt certain. You felt, okay, we've got a date, got milestone, I can plan, and now suddenly, right? So now we've got one more month. What does it mean? Previous communication has to change, and all of that is going to change. So I guess this is the moment where the most important thing to do as a business leader is really to look after your own mental health and also adapt the mindsets of change. And it's pretty much one of the things where you have to resign yourself to the fact that we don't have control over this thing. It's going to change. And how is it going to change? And just make the best decision knowing that things are going to change. So what messaging are you sending internally? Because if you know things are going to change, then you still need to set the expectations the right way. And that's why communication, and even, you're talking about the show and tell earlier, that's also a really good platform to really be honest with people in terms of, this is the plan that we have based on the government's coming back, and things might change, but this is what we are going for now. But so it's two aspects. One is really, really strong communication. Two goes back to what I've said over and over, an assessment of your company and being agile to have the short-term and the long-term plan. And as one of the comments said as well, hybrid working is going to be the new way of working. Even people saying we're going back 100%, we'll have to have some kind of flexibility, at least until we get out of this COVID, whatever that means as well, actually.
So what are those things, really important. So people on the call today, you're going to put that time aside, your dinner with the Queen time. Those things that you could be implementing now that are going to, that you'll thank yourself for in a few months' time. So, okay, we still don't know the exact time frames. We still don't know when this awful thing is going to be over. But if we look back on ourselves, the things that we've implemented now, what would they be that would be really positive for the next few months?
Yeah. So definitely, I think for me, one of the biggest shifts that's happened for companies, where it actually happened, was the change from expecting people to be at their desk for when they're working, or expecting people to have their Microsoft team always being green, to managing by outputs. Because I think that's such a healthy change mentally and for a healthy organization anyway. We all work differently. Some people like to write down their thoughts. Some people like to be online. Some people might want to work at different times. And I think just in organization moving to looking at productivity differently is a huge change, and something that you should really think that even if you're going back 100% in the office, how do you maintain some aspects of that? The second one is the communications. Again, that one, it depends, but I've seen a lot of cases where some companies actually became closer because they had to talk more, because when we were online, and they had to find new ways of being okay about talking about our mental state, which is something that we don't talk about. Okay to talk about our personality types, which I always bang on about. It's really important to understand your personality so that you understand how you play with others. If your company's got a shift where we're opening up a bit more, I'm not talking about saying absolutely everything about you, but enough so that we get our blueprints of how we function to our team members. Is there a way of continuing with that? Now, the show and tells are the things that are really good. But I guess one thing to bring in is definitely forward planning and having something that you can show to people, and so they know where we're going, they know what the roadmap is, and when the roadmap changes, which is even more important, that's something that people really need to embrace to be able to survive in the next few months as well.
I really love the word you used, and blueprint. You know, maybe it's good for people, instead of thinking, right, I've got to implement massive change and develop a massive strategy right now, and I don't know what's going on. But it feels to me like it might be a useful exercise next week just to sit down and think, okay, so where are we now? How has that changed from a year and more ago? And then once you've kind of almost benchmarked that again, you've got your blueprint. Okay, right, this is who we are. And then you can look ahead, can't you? So yeah, that's really interesting. And any sort of tools that you could recommend to people, just to sort of close in case there's any other questions, but any sort of tools that you can recommend that will help people get through this period more, to help with productivity and happiness?
So a couple of tools. One, I think that it's really important to be able to talk to people, to understand people's emotional well-being, and also how people work as well. And one of the big changes in hybrid versus working from home, sometimes people talk a lot about like introverted versus extroverted as well, you know. So if I'm someone who likes to be with people, am I affected? Have that chat and use DISC. DISC is a really good way of understanding the personality of the team. But don't just use a DISC to say, this is my DISC profile, because I've seen that a lot. I'm like, that's not the point. It doesn't actually matter what color you are, because you have all the energies. But what is important is to use the DISC profile to then channel the conversation to the changes that you want to make. Then you can understand why someone might be more reserved in one way or another, right? So if you're gonna bring your people together, especially whether you decide to go back in the office and you're thinking of a good team building, use profiling and DISC and asking people questions about how they are, to open up about themselves and make conversation that are not based just on people being guarded, but people being more open and talk about the changes in the work environment. The next one, this one, I'm happy to share that with people who might want to get some of the framework that I use when I assess organizations, to first understand where they are. There's different areas that I look at planning, even if you're going to do it on your own. How do you plan? Look at communication, look at leadership, how the state of your management team, and how they're dealing with that. I look at obviously this idea of hybrid and the market. What does it mean? And then a couple more. But if you are not sure and you've got your dinner with the Queen booked and you want to start on the first area is always planning, because that's the one that hurt us the more. So look at how are you sharing and communicating your vision with your teams. So once you have that, you can then start looking at all of the other areas and just have a list of what needs to be changed, what needs to be adapted, and everything like that. And thanks again for the lovely comments that I have on the chat. I keep on glancing, and it's been great. There's been a lot of messages, and I just want to say thank you to everybody for really interacting with Sue and I today.
Thank you. And what's coming up next time, Naily? Is it next week, the next event?
Yes. So next week on Thursday, I'm quite excited, because we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the myths and some of Q&A on hybrid working as well. So if anyone has any questions, especially coming up for today, and you've done your work and you're thinking, oh, maybe there's something that Nelly could expand on, please send a message through. We're going to have a Wheel of Fortune or Fortune or Wheel. I can't remember which one it goes. We're going to have a Wheel of Fortune, a kind of a wheel with a different question that we will take on social media, and also certain topics. Things like Zoom meetings, is that a thing or is it real? So we're going to go through the research that I've got on that. We're going to look at virtual reality and how some people are bringing their virtual reality in the office. And one of my favorite ones is companies deciding to close offices, which is great for people like me who love remote working. But what is the actual impact on your people and your culture? So yes, tune in next week for more exciting things. And if you do have any question, please let us know on social media. We'll be happy to answer them. And before we go, a very, very special thank you to Sue for interviewing me today. It's been great. I think it's our second interview, right? Because we had one on the radio. And again, cheers to our anniversary as well.
Happy birthday.
You too. Thank you.